to take that one right now. Okay, well, I'll make it do. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for staying with us, and I do appreciate Saida Carter and Miss Iria for allowing our students to express themselves on social issues that's affecting the world globally and locally. So thank you again to the students that were able to receive. Thank you. My name is, yes. My name is Chalana Brown, and I have an exhibit here today, and it's in an opening is on Emancipation Day for a very good reason. During COVID, I took the opportunity to visit some of our spaces, our historical spaces, and I was going to all different types of historical spaces, not just sugar mills, but for some reason I had a connection to sugar mills, and I felt it necessary for me to tell the story. It started off with Castle Coakley, and when I visited Castle Coakley, I felt something there, and I wanted to know more. And when I went online, I was able to find a lot of information about the planters. And plantation owners are called planters. However, I wasn't able to find a lot of information of the persons who were enslaved there. And hence, I started a journey to try to tell the story, the African story of the sugar mill. And that's what we're here today to talk about. And I just want to show the bridge, because today Saida and Miss Iria was talking about social justices, and sometimes people, not just young people, you receive information and you don't always take it in at that one point that you get the information. I had heard Dr. Chenzira and I had heard Dr. George Franklin state that before in a conference about telling the African story of our history. And at the time, it did not stick with me. It didn't resonate as much because we live a very creolized personality here in the Virgin Islands, where it's a mesh between European and African. And I always just saw my identity as both, and parts of that, our African identity is erased. But in this journey, I realized that how much of it is still here with us, and even in our Mokojumbi arts, our masquerading arts, in our architecture, it's prevalent. But for some reason, that story behind of it is erased, and that is why we are here to talk about today. So today I have my panelists with me. I have Miss Pardi Zahid. Sorry, correct? Did I correct?
Zahidi.
Zahadi. My apologies. And she is an archaeologist here, and I would allow her to speak about her work a little bit. She's with us. She's studying at a Danish university. However, she is not Danish. I'll just let her speak a little bit about her research.
Hi, everyone. Can everyone hear me? I'm kind of a mumbler, so thank you, Chalana. Thank you to all the panelists. I'm really looking forward to listening to you all and learning from you. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Pardi Zahidi, and I'm an archaeologist. My current research is focused on community heritage and how communities on St. Croix engage with and experience sites that are associated with the Danish colonial period. And I suspect that the reason Chalana wanted me here today is because although the focus of my research isn't specifically on plantations or windmills, I'm currently working on a project about how communities on St. Croix define, redefine, and negotiate meaning at sugar mill sites. So sugar mills, I think, are agreed upon as this kind of symbol of St. Croix's heritage, but as we know, St. Croix is this enormously diverse place, and so that symbolism can be quite ambiguous. So part of my research right now is working on teasing that out a little bit, and I'm always looking for potential collaborators, so if this is something that interests you and you'd like to get involved, please reach out after the panel. I'd love to talk to you. Thanks.
Okay, thank you so much. And now I also have Neb Kara, which most persons know in this community very well. He is formerly known as Carl Christopher, and he is a master builder. Neb Kara.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's an honor and a privilege to be here to discuss this matter, but just let me give you a background of who I am, and a lot of people don't know me from this perspective, but when I went to college, my specialty was studying ancient Egyptian architecture and engineering and their education system, and that's what my specialty was, and it was also in what we might term anthropology. At a professional level, I've been involved in organic farming and agriculture, but I've spent over 40 years in the construction industry. I've had the opportunity to study with some of the master builders and the master craftsmen here. I did some apprentice training with Mr. Fletcher Pence of Life and Environmental Arts Project up in the rainforest. I learned about wood joinery and furniture making and things here in St. Croix. I also studied with Luther Benjamin. You might not know him, but for those from St. Thomas, he's a master builder. He was the first who built the federal building in St. Thomas. He was the first black Republican man who had a major contract with the federal government and built a project approximately close to $10 million back in the 70s. That's a federal court building in St. Thomas. I studied with him and apprenticed under him in construction management and estimating. And I've worked with a lot of various craftsmen, a man by the name of Mr. Abramson, that's Chalana's uncle, who come from up, Mahogany Road up there. We call it Christmas, the master builder, a master roofer, a master carpenter, a geometrist, a mathematician. I had the opportunity to work with him for about 5 to 7 years and learned about roof constructions and a lot of things about, the type of roof that we build in terms of the hip roof and the gable roof and the shed roof and all the various types of roof that we build here. And so I've been in the industry for a long time. Presently, my specialty is I'm a certified estimator. That's my strength. And I also, on my own, I've studied drafting and architecture, and I'm now working on how to cut the construction cost in the territory.
Yes, yes.
It's something we have to do. Right now, the average home, and I got an architect here, he can verify what I'm saying. We're talking about minimum $170,000, $175,000, $200 a square foot. So if you want to build a house, let's say a nice little house, 2-bedroom, 1 bath, or 3-bedroom, 2 bath, let's say 1,500 square feet, you're talking $300,000. But we're not here to discuss it this afternoon. We're here to discuss our heritage that's rich. And since my background is some of the African architecture and engineering, I will be offering some of that. And to show our respect for the master craftsmen and craftswomen and all those who did the beautiful construction and the design that we have as our heritage. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you for being with us. And now I also have Dr. Chenzira Davis Kahina. She is the director of the Virgin Islands Caribbean Cultural Center, nestled within the College of Liberal Arts and Social Sciences at the University of the Virgin Islands. Dr. Chenzira Davis Kahina.
Greetings. I know you didn't even get a chance to clap, did you? Good afternoon, everyone. It is really an honor to be here. It's beyond words. Congratulations for you doing this, because we've been kind of pushing, nudging a bit for a while, so we're very glad to be able to be a part of your opening. To have it on Emancipation Day, and for those that don't know me, the focus is around what do we do after we claim spaces? How do you reclaim space? How do you use photography, different elements of the visual arts to actually reclaim these spaces so that it doesn't become the narrative of someone else? Mm-hmm. How do you restore, how you bring that narrative so that it is accurate? Let me make sure I go back a minute. So it is historically accurate and culturally correct, right? That's part of what I'm hoping to be able to share in this afternoon's reason, that my area of specialization, I wish I could just pick one, but as an African woman with Caribbean upbringing in an indigenous space that grounded in Quisqueya, I don't have one spot. You have to do a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and you better be good at most of what you do, right? So I don't really have much more to say there. Do I? Congratulations! You knew it had to come. Give thanks. Give thanks.
Also, just to continue with that, Mr. Jervell Larson has the knowledge as well. He is an architect and an owner of Taller Larjas. I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly. Okay. Architecture and design, and can I share that you're the architectural school that you are helping to organize?
Sure.
Okay, so he's part of an organization that just received a lump sum of money to open an architectural school for our youth here in the Virgin Islands.
Virgin Islands Architecture Center, building arts and crafts. There you go.
Correct. So I thank my panelists for receiving the invitation. So on this, oh, sorry, my bad.
Oh, no, that's great. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for Chalana for inviting me today. We had a very interesting back and forth. Initially with the invite, but it worked out very well. It's always a pleasure to be before the community and to talk about issues that relate to our built environment, which is extremely unique on the island of St. Croix and in the Virgin Islands in general. I'm here to be somewhat some background in terms of what the building crafts and what we have here. And I think I'm also here to stir the pot a little bit. So I'm going to differ slightly from what Chalana said in terms of the African heritage and history has been erased. It really has been hidden. That's really the I think, in my opinion, the proper lens that we have to look at it as. Because these are really African Danish towns. These are not Danish towns. These have got to be viewed of the people that actually built by brick, by stone, by lime mortar, that you still see standing today. And it's a testament in the face of adversity of what they did, and it's our cultural heritage and pride. So it's from that lens and reshaping the narrative that begins to refocus how we have to view our conservation and preservation of buildings, how we treat our spaces, and how we sort of represent ourselves to each other and to the world. So hopefully this will continue to be and will be a very dynamic presentation today. Thank you.
Well, I'll just go from where you left off then. So if we're here in Frederiksted, but it's not exclusive to Frederiksted. When we look at our buildings, when I was on my journey and learning about sugar mills and the architecture behind of it, I don't have the knowledge of the wealth of knowledge that you have, my panelists. So hence here, these are the questions. I learned somewhat of the towns following a Georgian and Victorian style sort of architecture, but it's scholars don't really call it that because it's in its own class. It's a what we call a creolization of those types of architecture from Europe. Can you tell us a little bit about that, and especially since this space also too is part of that, those spaces that are creolized?
Start with the Madam the Historic.
Okay, so let me just give a little extra background because, and when I speak to these things, I'm coming from a place where I sort of tasked with preserving the cultural history, especially the built environment. So I sit on the Historic Preservation Commission here in the Virgin Islands. I've done it for multiple years. I also am the advisor to the National Trust for Historic Preservation, representing the VI. So I've been doing this for a long time. My practice is 22 years old. So it has always been a journey that you learn, because you can't learn it all, even in school. It's really through practice and where you come from. And there's sometimes visceral things that happen that you don't even know about, that you're connecting to the building and space. So I just want to qualify that, I mean, this is a sort of a neoclassical architecture that has been kind of forced onto the place, and it's forced by colonialists that viewed and created a very distinct place for purposes of multiple things to, grow sugar and other things that generated large wealth and income for Denmark and Germany and all these European powers. And they left this mark of what they envisioned the place to be. However, it is synthesized with the enslaved Africans that actually were master builders when they were forced to come here. I mean, they didn't learn this stuff. They came with the knowledge. They understood how to sort of feel the material, how to slake the lime, which is from the conch shells that they burned in the kiln. That was the mortar that put the bricks together and the stone. And then they erected these monuments that we presently see. And if you look at the records, and there's a substantial amount of records that we have due to the way the Danes sort of categorized and cataloged so many things here, that we can actually see the laborers, those skilled people that worked on specific plantations that were even taken to other parts of the island or to St. Thomas and St. John that helped build these monuments that are present today. And we have to sort of understand what happened here in that context to understand why it means so much to us today. Although there is some stigma that comes along with it, because some of us view these relics and these monuments as being a negative of our negative past. And it's a very dark past, but it's also mixed with a wonderful derivation of African craftsmanship with this European influence that now has become specific to this place and this place only.
Anybody else want to? Thank you so much, sir. Anybody else want to make us? Okay, there you go.
Yes, I'd like to offer a little information here. I first would like to acknowledge what you said. There's this myth that the people who were brought here and enslaved were not people well educated. When you study the history of Africa, West Africa, Timbuktu and all those areas, you go there was a University of Guinea. When you study some of Odenthorpe's work and you see some of the tribes and nations or kingdoms that were captured and brought here as enslaved, you will see that they came from people who were builders and people who had education. There are stories about, when I read the story, there are people called the Moors. A lot of those Moors who came here, they spoke and wrote Arabic. A lot of people don't know that. And in those areas of West Africa, they were building the masjids and the mosque. And they were very well versed in, what we call clay type construction and also stone construction. And like you said, they knew how to work with the lime and things of that nature. But there's something that we also have to go beyond. And that is, where did the Europeans get construction and engineering from? Where did the craftsmanship come from that was copied by the Greeks from what we call North Africa today, Northeast Egypt? And the Greeks passed it on to the Romans. And now we're also learning in anthropology and archaeology that what we call casting of concrete was being done when they were building the pyramids. So we see that this knowledge would have left Africa, gone to Europe, come back again to us through what we call enslavement. And you can see this in the churches. So if you look at the Catholic Church, you're going to see the Spanish-style construction, because the Spanish were more Catholic. We look at the Anglican, you're going to see the more English style, because that was the Church of England. We look at the Lutheran, we'll see more the Danish. And then we look at the Moravian, we're going to see more the German. So we have all this culture interacting with European and also the craftsmanship that was coming from Africa. Because we have to realize that in Monopotapa, in what we call Zimbabwe today, there are huge stone structures. In Malapulanga, that's South Africa, they're now claiming their structures that have been there over 30,000, 40,000 years. We're talking about stone structures. So we see that this type of construction wasn't something that the European brought, but it was sort of a melting together, amalgamation, coming together, one being a dominant culture, which would be the ones who would be mostly the ones I would say doing the design and saying this is how we want this is how we want that, and all that. And there's one thing I want to also say to the members of the community here today. There's only one thing we must remember, and very importantly, we must remember this. Sometimes the vibration that was being used to build some of these structures weren't the best vibration, because there was a lot of anger sometimes. Because, sometimes you're forcing people to do things they don't want to do. And so sometimes we want to know why we have certain things the way they look right now. Well, those vibrations are there. And I'll say this, and I'll stop here. I happened to have the opportunity to work in a state river, to walk the ground. I was planting there for 5 years, tilling the ground, planting food. And while we were out there planting, we could feel the vibration of the ancestors out there in the field. As a matter of fact, one of our students almost went crazy from that particular vibration, because the ancestors told us they're very angry about what has happened here in the territories, and they were angry with us as their descendants for all the work that they have done. So I give kudos to my brother here, Jerville, for telling us it's not a Danish thing. It's an African-Danish thing. And also remember, before Columbus, the Mayans, the Incas, the Aztecs, we had high civilizations here, building with stone and building very large monuments, pyramids, etc. Don't forget that. So this is not a European thing. It's a human thing. Thank you.
What I was going to add is that energetic piece is what a lot of us overlook sometimes, is that because there are some persons that are very comfortable never going inside of a fort, like never wanted to go inside of, I'm always amused by persons that have weddings inside of the fort here, either Frederiksted particularly, and they think it's like a very jovial, uplifting space, and they're setting their bower like adjacent to a dungeon. I don't know, like energetically, if you want that type of energy in your marital union. And I think it's important that we express to persons when we're reclaiming space here that there's certain spaces that certain things should happen, and there's certain spaces where things like of that nature should not happen. And those spaces there's a type of atonement. I know persons go through communion, and there's a reason that we go through communion. Whatever faith, you can, I don't want to say it's only in Catholicism, because every faith has some kind of consecration, baptismal, something where you're atoning. There's an atonement. There's a forgiveness that is being asked for. Your repentance, whatever you want to call it, that's also connected to claiming these spaces. When you go, because I listen carefully, all of us watch all of Chalana's posts. You are like our news reporter for what's going on all spaces historic. We just wait for you to do it. We just wait. I just want you to know, right? Like seriously, because it's like, which place is she going to today? And what space did she go to this weekend? And what did she find? And who stopped her? Who said something to this child when she going to take a picture? So it's like we have to take a minute to reflect on even how we look at policy of these spaces that are significant, sacred, hallowed ground spaces. These aren't just mills. Mm-hmm. These aren't just ruins. These are very hallowed grounds. And some people don't understand, wherever you're finding some of these buildings, you're guaranteed to find human remains within a 200 square diameter.
Yes.
That's just what our ancestors did. It wasn't like you went far to bury somebody. You usually buried them adjacent to your place of residence or in an area near to where you did worship. And we need to remember that when we're in these historic spaces, that we want to deal with that energy of atonement, whatever spiritual system you follow, as long as it's one that is one of healing and upliftment. Like that's the part that I just needed to add as I heard, the scientific piece of what's happening with the architectural piece and the historiography piece in terms of the African connectivity. You'll hear all of us using this term. We say African, European. Some of us, you'll hear us say Eurasian, because it's really funny that we still are calling Europe a continent All of us know what a continent is. Is Europe really a continent? You have to kind of connect it to Asia. I'm just saying, for those of us that did geography. We don't have to act like we're in school today. I'm not trying to do that. I'm just saying, like, how we look at the earth, how we look at these spaces. For me, I'm kind of bringing in, yes, some of that intellectual part, but focusing on that socio-spiritual element, because sometimes we forget. You go into the fort. I don't know what happens to other people. I have difficulty walking right across the fort past the dungeon. Me personally, I can see the excrement when you go in there. I don't care how many times they paint it, right? And I'm saying this because it looks exactly like what you see in Goree Island. Exactly, down to the design. And I'm sure that Brother Javil can explicate like the differences in that design, but that's what we see, that's what we feel. So while we're claiming space, we need to be looking at how do we shift it so persons that are owning these spaces, you know, they bought the land that happens to have a ruin or happens to have a mill or happens to have a great house, how do we provide that support and show that respect for those spaces, right? So that things, you know, we don't want people just like running out their house. What Nepkadat was referencing is real. We had a person that came to River and she had an encounter beyond anything that we were really accustomed to. And it took that sister almost a year and a half to get back her balance because of what she saw. Because it was like, and she didn't know the history of River. And she told us things that we ended up reading in books because she saw it. So I'm just suggesting that when we are claiming these spaces that we also look at that socio-spiritual element.
I'm glad you shared that. Thank you. If you want to give a round of applause. Thank you for sharing. I want to give reverence to my mother, Marjorie Brown, and my son, Zaya Rogers, my brother, Stephen Brown, and Miss Laverne Joseph. I call their names because these are the persons that journeyed with me to some of these spaces. At first, I went to very accessible spaces, and then I started to go towards spaces that were harder to get to. There are even spaces that we encountered that we never did get to the sugar mill. It seems so near, but when you have to go through so much forestry, it's almost like hours upon hours. So I give reverence to them for helping me and being on those journeys with me. But when you say claiming spaces as well, when I was a young person, and even though my mother brought me up in a very Pan-African home, there were still certain spaces that I thought that I belonged in and that I did not belong in. And I apologize to my mother if she thinks that, you know, she raised me enough to know that I belong in all spaces. But I'm just saying, experiencing what younger people might feel, that even though you verbally tell them they belong everywhere, there's spaces where you feel like you don't belong, either by people purposefully doing it or unintentionally doing it. And one of those spaces was sugar mills. So it's like, I remember me and Pardi, we were with a group, and we went to see a sugar mill in the Monbiju area. And when we were driving there, I was like, I think I know where we're going to. And then we drive up, and it's Olaf Hendricks' home, his space. And I went there so many times with my mother when I was younger because his wife is my mother's cousin. And I remember playing with horses, playing with their daughter, running in the field. But for some reason, like selective memory, I never remember the sugar mill because it's just something that we always like kind of erased when we were young people. We didn't hear young persons talk about it. So therefore it was something like we know it was there. And then you erase it in your mind mentally, but then actually, literally in life, you erase it altogether. And that's what happened to me. I think some of these spaces, I've seen it so many times, but I never thought to think about, like, not my African story. It was always, when I was reflecting back, it was always a space of shame, for me at least. And so when I was when I was researching these spaces, it really hurt to find all this information about the planters and their children, and you hardly could find any information. But I do have to give reverence to Miss Mary Roebuck Mason and to Judge Tyson and his wife, because they were able to, guide me onto where I need to be, and it's still a journey. It's still a journey. I want, whenever we have libations, that we could call people's names, that we don't just call people's names from our grandmother, but we are able to call back names. And I hope that through this exhibit that we are able to find, hopefully, if you have persons from your family that lived and contributed to the wealth of other nations, contributed to the culture of this space. But when we say claiming spaces now, and we're talking about sugar mills, I've been, as Dr. Chen stated, in spaces where people were uncomfortable with me coming there. And so now that I looked into policy, because I am respectful of people and their spaces, and people have families, but I don't know if I'm too bold to say that I feel like I'm supposed to have access to heritage spaces. And the policies are very, very gray. So when I encounter situations like that, I'm trying to find the policies, and sometimes the policies don't align. I did ask someone from our preservation office to be here with us from DPNR. Unfortunately, they weren't able to come, so I do have to state that I did ask, and they received, but unfortunately, they weren't here. Is anybody here on the panel able to give some information about if persons wanted to go to spaces that are privately owned, like what is the policies of people accessing heritage spaces?
You knew that it was going to come to you, right? You knew that. I'm glad you did.
Okay, so it becomes a very tricky discussion because obviously with land ownership, you have sort of land rights. So these ruins are protected. And we have an antiquities law of 1998 that was enacted specifically to address this notion that you cannot remove and demolish and take away this built heritage, which is ultimately the way we should always address these very important properties. The rub becomes when people go onto someone's private property and there has been some litigation where people have gotten injured and then the property owner is liable. So therefore, there is this kind of resistance to allow it. But in many ways, it should be something that we can all access. So I think there's some mechanism that has to be created that we can help to ensure that, one, the property owner may not be liable of some certain things happening, whether you create an easement that you can have people come onto it and be protected. And also there's some safety measures that have to be with it, because again, many of these ruins can be unstable, which is another hazard that we have to be conscientious of. So we should help stabilize these ruins, and if they're not going to be sort of restored and conserved in a utilitarian way, then they need to be stable enough that someone can actually go in and experience it and not have something happen to them. So it's a complex thing, but I think it's something that we could figure out. I know the Landmark Society years ago had a heritage trail, and they had identified paths and created this kind of a walking experience. You could go to there and you could navigate these properties. But that overlay that we have of liability is an issue. So I think it's something for the Senate and policymakers to think about.
Yeah, so something that exists in a lot of other countries, in Europe especially, is a legal right to pass. And this is based on a tradition of universal access to land. A lot of these footpaths are protected under the same legal category as federal highways. And we have something similar in the Virgin Islands. You know, we have the Open Shorelines Act where beaches are all public property. So I think it would be great for the Virgin Islands government to look at some of these policies that work in other countries and then adjust them to work with local understandings around heritage.
Awesome. We have some members of the legislative branch here. So that will be good. So as we talk about heritage spaces being on private land, we also need to be unbiased and talk about heritage spaces being on government land, and our responsibility as government and private citizens and good residents to do our part also in making these spaces available, and also being part of our heritage and not being part of what you would call the hiddenness. I would say erasure, but I would use your vocabulary, the hiddenness. So can we talk about what are some of your ideologies about our government's responsibility to make sure that these spaces are available, and not only for the pleasure and for the reverence of residents, but also for persons who are visiting our islands to see our culture, not just in dance, but it also in architectural and structures, and even the things that happened to us in the past that were evil, but it's part of our history. How do we get our government moving in that way?
Yes, I'll start with that one. We had a good experience this afternoon right here with experiential learning. I think that's where it starts. It has to start with, first of all, I ain't gonna say I'm gonna start with the children, I gotta start with the adults. Especially our elders. When I was growing up, and I didn't know it was an African thing, but my greatest teachers were my grandparents. We go home in the afternoon, it was up to Granny Becca. And she was the matriarch, and she was the one that I would say instill our foundation in culture, tradition, to start with the food and the farming and all of that. But that's where I got mine. When I went to St. Thomas, it was my grandfather, my grandmother, but my grandfather more so, because he was the man that was the builder, the boat builder. He was the fish pot maker, the fisherman, and he was also the farmer. And I was fortunate to have both sides of grandparents helping to raise me. And when the Folklife Festival was here, I happened to speak to one of the elders who came here, and she said, in the tradition of Senegal where she came from, the parents, immediate parents, don't raise the children. It is the grandparents that raise the children, while the parents are busy making sure they bring the resources for the family, while the grandparents now pass on the wisdom of their age. And so with this so-called modern cosmological society that we live in, we've lost a lot of that. It has been eroded. So we have to now incorporate this back into the school. And we know the battle we've been having with this cultural education thing. You have to go to court and all the madness that we're going on here as a people. We should be ashamed of ourselves as a community. Me saying I say we. All right?
Collective
I
way.
include myself, okay? And all of us, because it's a we thing. So I think it has to start with educating and sharing with our children, and not just in books, but going in the field and doing things and building things and making things, so that we could also learn the tradition, the natural tradition of construction. I was in St. John the other day at Canil Bay, and I was looking at a structure. And I said, I'm studying this, style of construction and method of construction. I'm saying, here it is, I going out doing all this research, and they're right in front of my eye. Right here in the type of construction that they did. Working with the lime and all these things. Just think about this. How does a conch make a shell? A lot of people don't think about things like that. Just think about it. You ever felt how hard a shell is? Well, the ancestors saw that and they used the conch shell. They burnt it to make the lime. And we could see how strong these structures are standing. You ain't got a rebar and steel in them. Right. But what we call massive construction. They're thick walls and that's how it's engineered. So we need to start to train our children, work with our children. We need to bring them back into the woodworking crafts, the mason craft, the designing, the engineering, all aspects of that part of the culture, not just that aspect of the culture. Think about this. They worked with the Dutch people back in the past. There was a collaboration. where they developed the windmill system. Okay? Or the
That's
mechanical
juice.
gears and all of these things. We talk about mechanical engineering. You see what I'm saying? So we can use these things to help educate our children, to transform how they think, so that they can now become the preservers of these things. And not only are they going to preserve, but they could use this as a foundation to create better, sustainable forms of construction other than the one we use today. When we were doing a youth build project with Alone and them, we were doing a youth build project at the time. We were project managers for the youth build project. And some of our students from the youth build academy end up in Denmark to train with some of the crafts people in Denmark about this type of construction using, you know, the lime and all these things to learn to restore, like things like the fort. I was fortunate. We've been in our palace last night or yesterday. I know our palace is. That's right. That's our
Okay,
palace.
right. Government house. Okay.
Our royal house. We had the privilege to play drums in there and echo the whole building with our ancestral vibration.
Yes.
And it felt so good.
Yes.
You see, I feel good. So, that's our palace. We built it. They might have designed it, but we built it, and now it's ours. That big picture ended up in the
No,
that
it's
room
gone.
number.
Woo!
All right, we don't got a big ghost like what they call Harry Potter. Harry Potter. Yeah, remember the walls, all that picture on the walls. That's how you used to feel when you're going to government house. And I'll end there. So we can see how we can take this, Chalana, and with what you're doing and the team that you have together and working with Denmark, and just think about it, the windmills especially. Every place where there's a windmill, if you got common sense, which I think most of us still have, it tells you they wouldn't put a windmill there for nothing.
It's there strategically. It is
Right.
there strategically.
It's
when
there
I
to tell the
visit,
wind
yeah, I
in
feel
that
the wind. I
area.
felt the wind.
To turn those grinding
Yeah,
wheels.
I felt the wind.
You see what I'm saying? So think about that. We talking about wind energy now. Denmark right now is one of the leading countries in alternative and renewable energy. We got a long relationship with Denmark that they can't run from, they can't hide from, whether they want to or not, because we're going to remind them. And they have some obligations to us. You see what I'm saying? So they were part of all this. You just see the
Germany as well.
potentials with the shutting down of that place we call the stinking place over there. I'm talking about lime tree. It's supposed to smell like a lime tree, but it don't smell like a lime tree. All right? Just see the potential. Just think about this for a minute, and I'm going to stop here. That place could be an example of a sustainable, ecological, eco-sensitive industrial park. It can be an eco-sustainable industrial park as a model for the entire planet.
All right.
If we could have been a model for the oil industry, we could be a model for the renewable and alternative energy.
Right.
And I rest my case.
So I'm not going to dovetail on that at all because it was very well presented. But I do want to circle back a little bit about the government, the VI government's responsibility with their spaces. Because I think I would be remiss if I didn't make the comment that sometimes and many times the VI government is the worst perpetrator of preserving its own heritage. Okay? And you gotta give Jack his jacket, right? Because we have laws here, one being the antiquities law, that actually stipulates the VI government to take care of its historic properties. I mean, it's written in the law. You cannot neglect. You're supposed to maintain. You're supposed to do all these things with these buildings that are not being done. And we all understand we have economic woes that we have to deal with, but it is the responsibility of patrimony we're talking about. And therefore, it has to be something that's on the radar, that has to be focused and dealt with. Many times, even our laws don't have some teeth. They don't have enforcement components. And then there's not even some penalties that go with it to incentivize people to do the right thing. The last piece I have to say is that, and I say this constantly, Do not underestimate the power of the people. We speak up when we see things that we do not like going on. If people or the government isn't doing something the way we know it should be done, say it and demand it. And you have many vehicles by which you can do it. You can do it to your senators. You can do it to the person who's the administrator. You can tell it to the governor. You can go to the federal government and tell them. Don't be afraid to exert your power. We have a right to preserve our culture, and we know how to do it. Let's just do it.
Thank you, sir. Did you want to share?
Yeah, in tandem with that, so I feel that the conversations around heritage legislation are always framed around the future. And I think the future is really important, but I think that when we constantly frame these conversations around imagined people of the future, it makes it really easy to defer decisions that need to be made right now. And so I think an important first step is taking opportunities to set up workshops and looking at these workshops as opportunities to co-create knowledge. What are we preserving? Why are we preserving it? A lot of these places are 250 years old. They're not important because they're 250 years old. There are a lot of things that are 250 years old. They're valuable because they're still present and interwoven in our contemporary world, and people assign meaning to them now. And so I think reframing how we look at heritage legislation could be helpful in this regard.
And so, and when we talk about the government part, and because the university sits in a very peculiar space, being the only historically black college and university in the Caribbean, as well as a land-grant institution, there's some tasks and responsibilities and duties that haven't been pressed on the university here. However, we have a lot of universities from everywhere in the world that are coming here and studying, doing research, and I want to highlight that, in the millions of dollars. I want to highlight that millions of dollars outside of the Virgin Islands are being spent on various research, publication, archaeological digs, anthropological engagement, and it's very important that the government, and make sure I say this clearly, that the government agencies that have that responsibility are involved. Like I can't go to Dominica and dig in their ground without somebody from Dominica College or one of their institutions being engaged. And we have to navigate that pretty strongly, especially now that it's kind of like a free-for-all. People kind of come with it. This is America, and you can do whatever, for whatever, when whatever. And it's not. It shouldn't be like that, because there's a very unique experience here. And when we say claim, I just love this claiming spaces piece, because it lets us come to a space, that word that people get a little nervous with. Because when we talk about claiming space, then you're also talking about repairing the damages done in that space. So I just want to make sure I say that again. You're also talking about repairing the damages done in that space. So whether you want to call it the cute term reparatory justice, where you want to say we're going to talk about our shared humanity, if you can handle it, we're going to deal with reparations, because reparations in the 21st century is not just a check. It's going to be resources, and it's going to be land acquisition or maybe reacquisition. It's going to be something that's going to actually create some equitable distribution of how we protect these spaces. So I wanted to take a minute, because although she's not on the panel, and I know that she's hearing this over and over again, how many senators are here? Please raise your hand. I don't mean to put you by yourself, but we have the Honorable Genevieve Whitaker. And in her, mind you, this is her first term, and in what she's done in less than 100 days is pretty remarkable around these types of issues, because she was doing this before she was a senator. And she's been, from what I know, I've been watching you do this like from high school. You've been like this rabble rouser in a positive way. There we go. Say it again. There we go. There we go. We'll keep it as a secret. But we're just saying around protecting spaces and so forth. So part of this is we're asking that you can take the message of how legislature can facilitate some of this government engagement, how we can delicately, because I've sat in a meeting with the Honorable Senator with our Honorable Governor Albert Bryan quite recently, and I was shocked, and I want to say it publicly, at the manner. I don't usually get to hear executive branch engage and embrace legislative branch representatives like that. And it was, for me, it was the first. I haven't heard that before. So what I am asking is just that all of what we're saying, that can be conveyed, because there are policies that need to be tweaked. There are things that the university should do. I'm making sure that you all will protect me, because you know that I am not the president of the University of Virgin Islands. I am just a director of a center. I want to highlight that up front, but something that can be conveyed to the administration and the board of trustees, so that there is that thrust, that anything that comes through here in terms of engagement in any of these historic spaces, that there's some, even if it's just a visit, even if it's just an overview, even if it's to have our native-born, indigenous, knowledgeable, credentialed, make sure I say all that, licensed architects to just give insight, of course, with their fees being covered. I want to make sure I cover that so it's not free. But because people think we just want to do this for free. It's really important, because the government can only do what we give them. We have to give them instruction. I hope people are getting that. Say it again?
They're the people's servants.
There we go. And it's like, if we forget that, then a lot of things get left on the side, because they just don't remember. There's so many things for them to remember. They're worried about hurricanes and public health protocols and a host of other things. So these things tend not to be prioritized, because we don't have COVID-19 connected to historic preservation yet. I'm just being straight. We changed the whole planet. We did the mask thing, 6 feet, maybe it's 3 feet now, but sanitizing your hands every 5 seconds with alcohol that might do something to your skin. But we're doing it. But we don't do that with the same urgency when it comes to our historic spaces.
And when we talk about,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah.
Yes. And when we talk about urgency and heritage spaces, I have to say it is urgent, because when I speak to my brothers and sisters in St. John, and the identity of Sugar Mills is being changed, it's a structure that has a lot of power, so people are drawn to it. So people are using it in such ways that I think is inappropriate, and that's my perspective. I think about when I learned a lot about Auschwitz. Nobody could go and have a party in Auschwitz. The Jewish community will not allow that. It's a place to show the inhumanities that we have done and how we can learn from that. And in St. John, and I'm seeing it move over here on St. Croix, I'm seeing the identity of Sugar Mills changing in not into a heritage space, but in a party space, and that bothers me. And I don't know if you guys want to share anything about that.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, one of the unique things about Sugar Mills that we talk about, that empowering force that they have, think about it. Just think about it. They're not square buildings. They're circular, and they're circular for a particular reason. It has to do with aerodynamics. As you could see, when the wind blows, if you have a big flat surface like what's behind you there, and the wind is blowing against that, that's a lot of force. And when the wind hits that, it bounces back. So if that building is not strong, it's going to move out the way. Whereas if you have a circular building, when the wind comes, it ain't got enough force, no resistance, so it goes around it. It's called Aikido. I call it wind Kido.
There we go.
Wind Jiu-Jitsu. It's circular. And guess what? It's feminine. It's feminine. And so we can see from it that just the design, it should be respected. And it's built in a particular manner. It starts from above and it tapers up towards the top. Again, it's more, aerodynamic. So I say earlier, and there's something people must remember. When cane was being ground sometimes to juice, a lot of people died.
Yes.
If I had locks in them days and I get catch in that grinder and my head get pulled in, that's it. And many a times they ain't stop in the juice. So some Danish people might have drink a lot and eat a lot of African blood and bones. You know, that's real. A lot of people died in some of those mills or lost limbs, in some of those mills. And so, to me, they're sacred. They should be respected, and it should be law that you don't convert them into anything else. If you want to build something looking like it, then you can do that. One of my designs is something like that. So, you know, I don't see nothing wrong with it. I think UVI just put a building similar in terms of the circular design. So I think that we should respect it, but see the power of it. And to you women, see the respect of it.
So, excellent. So just quickly, the law does presently does not allow you to modify mills. It used to be allowed, but now it is not. Meaning, it has to remain a freestanding monument. The other little caveat, which is probably a big caveat, is there are always issues of how you conserve, and it has a monetary amount to it. So we have to sort of balance how we can stabilize these ruins and where those resources come from, because there is a school of thought too that says, well, just let them go back into the earth. And this happens because time, no matter even built of stone, it will happen. So there has to be some kind of mechanism that helps to preserve the buildings. And I think to some degree, even in St. John, where you have these estates that are just big open ruins and then they do some degree of interpretation, I think it's a bit hollow because it does not really give you the essence of what happened there. You don't hear stories of the people that lived there, what they went through. You could even do audio overlays of what it sounded like, and smelled like, and felt like, because at least if people had that as a property private owner, you would treat it differently, just inherently because you know what transpired there. This sort of whitewashing and this sort of keeping it hidden sort of makes these things this really kind of pastiche of beautiful stone buildings and these things that look almost like beautiful garden follies. That's not what they are. They have a lot of greater essence, but it's our obligation to catalog that information, get those stories and supplant them. Maybe it comes with when you buy it, that this information is there, the archaeology is done, that story is connected to the structure, and then that new property owner understands what he is dealing with, and when they welcome people into it, that information is given out. That's a suggestion. You can do it through policy too.
Sorry, I also just want to mention a side project, which is part of the larger project that I'm working on, which is kind of related to what you're talking about. So I'm in the process of developing a digital spatial map of St. Croix, which will include points on the map of different contemporary and colonial sites across the island. The intention is for it to be community generated and as anti-hierarchical and community derived as possible. And so once it's live in the fall, you'll be able to click on different points of the map, upload your own personal stories, upload your own archives, upload oral histories, music associated with different sites. What we're hoping is that it'll be a community resource and that it'll be useful for people here. But the most important thing is that people are contributing data to it so that it does become a democratic digital resource.
Thank you for sharing. So can I say that you're saying that we should have some legislation about the identity of sugar mills?
Sure.
Yes, okay. So that was said that there should be some legislation about the identity.